Yes, WeChat and the calls for Australian politicians to boycott the Chinese social media app, the Prime Minister's account, it was hacked. And WeChat is owned by Chinese tech giant Tencent, but it's known to be heavily monitored by the Chinese Communist Party. It's an extremely popular online community among Chinese Australians. Scott Morrison had an account, 76,000 followers. It's been taken over and rebranded. It's now called Australian Chinese New Life. His profile photo was deleted. The account description changed to provide life information for overseas Chinese in Australia. His account's been hacked. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese's hasn't. Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security Chair Senator James Paterson joins me on the line. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so tell us about WeChat and its importance to politicians. It's used by politicians to communicate with the Asian community, the Chinese community in Australia.
That's right, Neil. WeChat is the single most popular form of communication and news consumption for Chinese Australians. There are estimates that there are about 1 million active users of WeChat in Australia. And so if you're an Australian politician and you want to reach that audience, there's no more effective way of doing that. And that's why many politicians, including the opposition leader and the Prime Minister, have had accounts in the past. The Prime Minister's account, unfortunately, from about the middle of the last year, had great difficulty making posts, and the agent who operated the account on behalf of the Prime Minister had difficulty logging in. As I understand it, the government has written to WeChat to ask them to restore it, and not only has that not happened, but as you say, the account has been taken over and is now being used for another purpose. This is the Prime Minister of Australia's account. My view is, given that WeChat is such a closely controlled company by the Chinese Communist Party, that this amounts to foreign interference in our democracy and in an election year no less. And it's particularly concerning that they've sought to punish the Prime Minister and prevent him from posting on it, but they've continued to allow Anthony Albanese to post on it and post his attacks on the government on it, which we now can't respond to.
It's obviously why Scott Morrison's account was hacked, because he's been quite tough on the Chinese and he's called them to account for many things that have happened, and we don't need to trawl over all of the history. So the Chinese Communist Party says, well, we'll shut him down because the change of government in Australia is important to us.
Well, that's possible, Neil. An interesting thing about the timing is that it was around the meeting of the G7 in the United Kingdom last year, which you might remember was infamous because when the Prime Minister attended, he took the so-called list of 14 demands from the Chinese embassy and he handed it to other world leaders. He presented it to Boris Johnson and Joe Biden and Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister at the time, Angela Merkel and others, and said to them, this is what's happening to Australia. You don't want to find yourself in the same position Australia is. And lo and behold, at the same time, his account, which at that point had just been posting very uncontroversial COVID-19 public health information, how to get payments and support, that kind of content, all of a sudden had trouble being accessed and posted to and has now been taken over.
Okay, so what can be done about it, Senator Paterson? We'll talk about the politicians on the other side of politics in a second, but what can be done about it through the Chinese government? Are they likely to listen to us?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic about that, Neil. We can't get the Chinese government counterparts to pick up the phone to our Australian ministers at the moment. They have had a freeze on all contact with Australian government ministers for about 2 years. And in the list of 14 demands, they say the reason that they have instituted that, as well as the economic coercion campaign against us, is because of things which we think are core to our sovereignty as a liberal democracy. The freedom of members of parliament like me to speak out, the freedom of the press to criticise China for its human rights record, our decision to scrutinise foreign investment, our decision to crack down on foreign interference. These are all things that they have said must stop if we want to have a good relationship with China. And no self-respecting Australian government could ever concede to those demands.
Since you've made these calls for all Australian politicians to boycott WeChat, have you heard anything from the other side of politics? Anthony Albanese obviously can still use WeChat.
Look, not yet, Neil, but I'll be very interested to see what they have to say today. I think this is a really important thing. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. As Australians, we should not tolerate foreign interference in our democracy. And if Anthony Albanese and other Labor politicians keep posting to WeChat, they're effectively allowing the Chinese government to choose which Australian politicians can reach Chinese Australians. They're allowing the Chinese government to decide in our election campaign coming up who can campaign to Chinese Australians and who can't. So I'm calling on them to take a stand in the national interest, to voluntarily boycott WeChat until they restore the Prime Minister's account and allow equal access.
Well, Senator Paterson, in an hour, I'll be talking to the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, and it'll be top of my agenda to ask him. Senator James Paterson, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, Neil. I appreciate it.